if you think most of us bands there at the time were regularly playing to over 100 people every night that we gigged. Local bands don't do that now.
Go to the art centre, and there's a huge queue. I've never had that experience before. It was like all the way around. There was no way we were going to get in. So we gave up and just abandoned it and went in.
All that remains are grainy and blurred photographs. There's crumpled posters, flyers and ticket stubs, and cassette tapes. And the hissing rehearsal recordings from a boombox set in the corner of the room, or at the back of a venue for a live show. There's some 4-track demos and the odd tape from an actual recording studio out there as well. Apart from memories, this is all that remains of a music scene that set the course for so many often unheard talented voices. A unique scene formed, and it bucked the conventions that most bands across the United Kingdom faced at that time. When Washington Village was amalgamated with the surrounding colliery villages to create the new town in the 1960s, the population grew from a couple of thousand to 60,000 in just over a decade. Reclaimed land was used to build new estates, theoretically as half-mile square each: Glebe, Barmston, Albany, Sulgrave, Lambton and many more. These estates had their tribal demarcation lines for much of the youth of the growing conurbation. But in one estate, a series of old farm buildings were converted into a local cultural centre for arts, and eventually it became a retreat for many of the disaffected youth of various subcultures who needed to ignore those half-mile square restrictions, and they needed to connect with like-minded folk with one shared interest: music. It's where the Washington Music Collective was forged. I experienced that scene myself in the late 80s and the early 90s, at a time when Wearside was suffering from the final closures of the Durham minefields and shipbuilding had been killed off. The area was trying to find a new identity, and during that transitional period, the music scene allowed performers from Washington further afield to find their identities. I lived in those half-mile squares, and as I said, I was part of that community, but it isn't my story to tell. This is how some people discovered the scene and what it meant to them. We'll start with Scott Hamilton, who was the lead singer of art rock outfit Quel and later Bateman.
It was weird because I originally heard about it while I was at sixth form, so I had no contact with anybody washing way on, because all my friends were like Horton fence houses, which is good 5, 6, 7 miles in the opposite direction from civilization. And I'd been dragged through one night. I think we went a couple of times when I was about 18, and got to see Dadakoff at one point, and then the Junkies, I think, were the next gig afterwards that I saw. So it was always, they were kind of my first gigs, rather than sort of like my first proper gig in the City Hall. They were my first experience of live music. So
Mick Ward came from further afield, from Horden in the Durham coalfields, and he played guitar in the Killdares and later Ellis Dust, and they would travel through to Washington to play.
Just knew it was an interesting venue. It did a lot of different things. I mean, there was there's obviously the art side of things. There was obviously a drama side of things. There was stuff I'd heard about bands playing there, and it was sort of quite well known in the area that it was a good atmosphere and a good place to play. So it was like, yeah, we want to go there, and luckily enough, we did get there.
Adam Laybourne attended rock nights set up by the collective before later joining Quel.
I was a rock music fan, right, to put it in context, but I didn't realise there was rock nights on. Because I wasn't drinking age, I wasn't going into the granary or whatever. I was on the bus back from town and sat behind some pretty girls, and they were talking about going to the rock night. So when I got off the bus, I went straight around my mate's night and said, "Do you know what this is going on?" He goes, yeah, I've seen posters or whatever. Oh, we should go and have a look. So we went there expecting to sort of like, try and get chatting with these lasses from the bus, like. And I can't remember the band. I think it was Dadakoff. I think. If it wasn't Dadakoff, it was Harvest or Flight 19. And I was doing just a great night, fabulous night. And I got off with one of the girls, so that was alright as well. So.
Paul Lockney is the vocalist of local rock band Trip Hazard, and he kicked off his musical journey at the Arts Centre with hair metal outfit Shock Treatment.
Because I was in a band, forming a band with Gary Reid, and he mentioned that there was a collective in Washington, him being a Sunderland and me being from South Shields. He mentioned that we started going around attending with the bassist Rob McKibben, and the then guitarist Tony Masher, that's supposed to be the journalist. And then we just took it from there. We joined the collective and we attended the meetings, and there was a few line-up changes before we got to do a gig. But yeah, it was always interesting to me to find places like that.
And finally, Doug Walker, a legendary drummer and percussionist who had involvement with many other bands, and he can be traced back to being the very first member of this collective.
It's the Rock Nights, or the music collective, started at the Arts Centre. Bearing in mind that prior to the collective being there, there used to be musical events on, at regular intervals, and it was relatively name bands. One of the things at the time was these music collectives springing up around the country. We weren't the first by any means, but somebody at the Arts Centre hit upon the idea of, well, look, we've got this gap to fill. Why don't we see if there's any bands want to form a music collective? They didn't really know what it was all about. The whole thing was they put an advert in the Echo saying, local musicians wanted to form a music collective based at Washington Arts Centre. I lived in Washington at the time, lived at Ox Cross. Somebody pointed the advert out to us, and I thought I'll give them a ring, and it sounds like a good idea. I was in a band, so it wasn't something I was really looking at. I thought I'll see what it is. So somebody at the Arts Centre actually came up with the idea, but I was the first person to reply. And I deliberately left it a couple of days after the advert appeared, because I thought I'll let somebody else get in there first. And they can have the job of, maybe having to put it all together. Of course, nobody had. So I was the first person to reply to it.
The initiation of the music collective at this point did not have a long-term goal, but immediately it became clear that there was a place in Washington for the project, and the hallmark of this remarkable scene was present from the first ball.
It was like a forebearing of what was going to come, because the four bands were totally different. But we sat there and we said, well, this is how other collectives are doing it, because we'd looked into it. And I was saying, well, I've always looked at this, from when they've said to us, would you be interested? I look at it as more as helping each other out.
The newly formed collective was brimming with positivity, and the venue itself was to benefit from the efforts of the newly set up cooperative. But the motivation to host the collective was not immediately clear. To attract international investment, Sunderland Council, who were the finances behind arts and culture in Washington, were throwing money in a different direction, towards an international kite festival, which was a headline event in the town for most of the decade, and it ate up most of the budget that they allotted to the sector, which meant that the Arts Centre needed other avenues to draw from.
It was a tick box exercise, because in order to get funding for the arts programme of what was coming up, they had to show that they had local theatre, they had to show that they had local arts, they had to show there was local music, and that was us. And that was how, at the very beginning, I was able to negotiate us getting the theatre barn, the high barn, for the gigs. They wanted us in the low barn, but I would say no. I said no, particularly because I knew the Dairyland Folk Club was in there on a Saturday. So the one that was in there on the Friday, Dairyland Folk Club on the Saturday, the Dairyland Folk Club didn't want another musical organisation in there.
The plan from the start was to be different. It was a facet of the initial concept that eventually became one of the trademarks of the gigs, which would become known locally simply as the Rock Night. Doug had an ideal and a direction, and it was one of opportunity.
But I used the fact that when I found out that we were nothing more than a tick box exercise, that initially anyway, that I said, well, I'll go for gold. And when they were saying, well, we want you to, and I said, no. I said, I want to set this up because if local musicians, and particularly young musicians, or musicians just starting out, I want, what I would like to do, what I would like to see, I said, I've heard about these other music collectives, I'm not interested in them. I want us to be unique. I want us to be something different. And what I want to do is I want to give the bands the opportunity of seeing what it's like to have to put on like a high quality gig. You know, my ambition is to make this as close to a band playing Newcastle City Hall.
The created perception and the ambition of the plan didn't just expose acts to the level needed to make a step, it created a real sense of camaraderie on and off the stage, and a chance to experience music in a setting different to any other on offer to developing bands in the region.
I feel really bad for bands nowadays because there doesn't seem to be kind of like that level. You know, I've been in bands ever since up until a couple of years ago, and you know what it's like trying to start a band off and getting gigs. It's nigh impossible. You end up playing some pub somewhere in a corner for half an hour, sandwiched between an indie band and some weird DJ, and you don't fit in. Whereas the Art Centre, it was like, there's a stage, there's monitors, there's lights, there's a PA, there's, you know, a proper guy doing sound, and it was amazing, you know, because you kind of were in that space, and there was people there to actually, you know, some people would come and see your band or whoever was playing, but a lot of it was, you know, the people who came week after week after week after week, you know, and that was always great because you got to know everybody in the scene, because the scene was the regulars would turn up. It wasn't people who were there to pose or prostitute their next band or project or wherever it was. It was people who would just kind of lived for the music, you know. It was a great atmosphere.
Despite the kick-off of the collective and the Rock Nights being a simple attempt to raise funding, once it got into gig, it moved from being a venue to being a scene. And in incremental steps, those opportunities for bands and performers grew.
A lot of venues closed. They always put bands on. I mean, the good thing about the Arts Centre was they put bands on a Friday night, Saturday night, which is great. You look at other venues, indie night, alternative nights, Thursday night. It's always Thursday night. For some reason, the night before everyone's going out really over the weekend, and sort of nearly midweek, let's stick them on the jokers, you know, let the daft lads and daft lasses have a little bit of a play around, bring some of the mates in if we're lucky, we'll sell a bit of beer. That's our night. And nobody really, there was a few venues did better than that, obviously, but no, not with the Arts Centre. They give you a chance all week, and some good nights on a Friday and a Saturday, definitely.
The connection with the Arts Centre for bands and attendees became an integral part of the shows. Large crowds were common, which was and still is an unusual occurrence, and it ingrained itself into the psyche of those who were there.
Yeah, the first gigs I saw were in the High Barn, and whenever you sort of, you know, listen to music or picturing yourself performing somewhere, you go places which you're familiar with, wasn't it? So to me, playing in the High Barn was what, you know, and I was away for university, and yeah, I was in bands and we did gigs when I was at university, but in my head, I always pictured myself playing in the High Barn, which really doesn't sound like a huge aspiration, but yeah, I thought I'd made it when I did that. I mean, I think the first gigs we did were in the Low Barn, which were fine, but you know, I wasn't playing the High Barn.
While Adam, Mick and Scott connects all the virtues of what was being offered up and the showcase that they used to their advantage, there's one story that Doug and Paul can share that celebrates the entire ethos of what these events were intended to create.
I booked the bands, if you like, and organised who was going to play when, and keeping it a varied sort of programme. But one of the most bizarre ones, and there was a few, but one of the most bizarre ones was when Shock Treatment played. And I had this thing where we had the two bands that were playing, but we also introduced a showcase segment in the middle, where people who came in saying, is there any chance of getting a gigs? I never ever asked for a demo tape, because I used to hear horrendous stories about it, and I always thought it was a bit insulting, what the time and effort of getting a demo tape, giving it to somebody, and they never listened to it. You never heard anything back. So I always said, like, got the showcase thing, you've got 20 minutes to half an hour while they're swapping the bands over for you to do your stuff. I said, because at the end of the day, it's usually me who has to go and answer to the art centre. I used to have loads of meetings. We heard this happened. And I would sit there and instead of looking, trying, oh yeah. So you knew about it? Oh yeah, of course I did. And you thought it was all right? Well, yes, that's my job. And they would be like looking at each other and going, right. I didn't always know what was going to happen. And there's many a time I was there with my head in my hands going, how the hell am I going to explain this? But unfortunately, a lot of the time, the art centre was getting used to us and it never got mentioned again, some of the things. But with their Shock Treatment, when they did that has got to be the most unique gig.
That art centre gig was the first ever gig we played. And we played on a massive stage with a drum riser, with pyrotechnics. We were rock gods. In our little minds, we were, oh, this is the life.
Shock Treatment said, we're going to have this drum riser. And I'm like, right, okay. And then when I turned up on the afternoon, because I mean the block nights used to run from about 7 till 11. But what a lot of people didn't realise was we were often in there from half 12 at noon through till midnight. You know, getting the things together and getting everything ready for people coming in. But they were in a bit earlier that day, and they were putting up the scaffolding. So I'm like, right, okay. And on that one, we'd done a gig, and we had Phil Caton and Phil in his ukulele fame.
We were apparently the first band to ever bring 12-foot of scaffolding to build a drum riser. We used a lot of pyrotechnics, and we were just like, you know, at the time, hair metal was, yeah, because we were all like Motley Crue, Kiss, Hanoi Rocks fans, you know. We all had the spiky hair and the makeup, and we were on with Phil and his ukulele, who I think these days would be classed as a George Formby tribute band. And that was like sort of the eclectic mix that you had. I mean, he went on and did his little thing with his ukuleles and his banjolales and that, and Doug Walker joined them on drums, so he had to scale the 12-foot drum riser, play drums from above him. It was brilliant. Listen, Dougie was terrified. He says, it moves when you play it. But it was fun. I mean, yeah, being young lads, we were all a bit like arrogant of ourselves, but it was fun. It was so much fun. I mean, the pyrotechnics and everything.
And it was a case of the art centre. Can we have a word? Did you know what's with all this scaffolding? I says, oh, it's because the bands were going on. I says, it's to give us like split stage effect. So you knew about it? I went, yeah. I said, I will admit, I didn't know they were going to bring quite so much, but I knew they were going to bring some. Oh, well, as long as you knew about it, that's all right. And that was their little box ticked. You know, we asked about it. If there's any problems, we did ask about it. But Shock Treatment were there, and they had the pyrotechnics underneath the scaffolding, barbed wire wrapped around it. Gary, the drummer, up there with gaps in between the boards, so you could look down and see the ground. I mean, the ceiling was what, about 50 foot up or something, and he was up at about 35 foot. When Phil went on and did his bit, him and the cello, he started playing, done a couple of George Formby songs. He introduced the guy on the cello. I can remember they did the hippopotamus song, Mud, Mud, Glorious Mud. And people in the audience were like, what the hell is this? Phil was a bundle of nerves. He went on in a smoking jacket and all this, and they're doing this, that and the other. But then it was a case of brought the other people in. I got on Gary Reid's drum kit up the top, and I'm thinking, you know, all happening was this faint little noise below us. And I can remember looking down, and they put this dustbin underneath the drum riser. And I'm looking down, that was the first I knew about the pyro. I'm looking at them going, is that what I think it is? So of course, we went on, and then they did the things. And it was a brilliant night because Shock Tree was totally different to everything Phil had done. But people loved it. They loved the variation. And of course, when the pyrotechnics went off, they hadn't really thought it through. So of course, when the pyro went off, here's all the sparks shooting up between the gaps in the floor of the drum riser, up between him and the drum kit, everywhere and all that. It looked great. But I don't think you would get away with it these days. Well, these were the days where you could do that.
While there are many stories like these, and some are truly not at all suitable for broadcast, it wasn't all about emulating the success of arena rock bands. Many of the attendees and performers found themselves facing a bleak future in an area that was becoming an industrial wasteland. The information technology revolution had yet to land in the area, and traditional industries had not been replaced numerically in terms of permanent employment opportunities. The social pressures and shifting political landscape did create pressure points, meaning that it became a place for not just escape, but a place for creative expressions. Scott Hamilton had faced layers of darkness prior to his first steps into the arts centre scene, and it was perfectly placed for him to use that opening to help himself.
You were the guy who used to hang upside down from the rafters singing it, and it's like, yeah, God, I really, that was me. Guilty as charged. Sorry. What can I say? I was young. I was idealistic. You were doing things that now you would kind of cringe at. Into it. I mean, for me, I just kind of switched off in performances. It became an outlet for me because I was coming out of 2 years previously having an overdose and trying to kill myself and having a breakdown. So for me, it was just it became a venting system that that weird side got out. And I remember sort of like coming off stage, and it was a case of like, if I wasn't scraped, cut, bruised at some point or aching, then it was a bad gig.
The catharsis was real. The negatives of life could be taken, and there was the opportunity to swivel those experiences to at least partially exercise some demons and at least begin the journey down a different route.
I came in from the outside, so I didn't particularly know anybody, and for me it became the perfect place for me. I started to learn about myself properly. I started to grow properly. Coming in, I was completely naive, in my early 20s, and I would say you're completely emotionally stunted. And I came into the art centre, and you become part of the family.
Now, at that inaugural meeting of the Washington Music Collective, 4 bands from different genres joined together, and that understanding of the need to feel music and culture became perhaps the central theme to the Washington scene. Far from being the pick of the top of the pops, the music and styles of those involved in the scene was for the most part the antithesis of the polished, PR-staged, colourful and soulless offerings of the BBC show. Substance counted for everything. Subcultures mixed at the venue. Away from the frequent beatings and conflicts from a more general part of society, the outcasts came together as one. Whereas bigger towns may have had separate domains for metalheads, punks, goths, indie fans, glam rock aficionados, and everything in between, this one geographical location bonded all of those off-peak lifestyles together.
It was our home from home, because you knew you could go there and you would see people that you knew who, you know, that you would want to hang out with. You know, it was a safe place. There was never any problem there because of who you were or what you were. If there was any aggro, it was because somebody was annoyed with you because, you know, for human things, you know, you necked their girlfriend weeks before, or you know, in some people's cases, you know, that was the trouble there. Or 16-year-olds getting, you know, drunk out of their heads for the first time and thrown up in the toilets. And
it was kind of like everything was mix and match. There were people with all different styles of music, different ages, different attitudes, but it all meshed nicely. There was none of this tribalism. There was none of this kind of ageism. There was none of this kind of, you're not from my neck of the woods, we'll whoop and holler for our band or our mate's band. It was kind of like, well, let's listen to you. Oh, that's good, I'll appreciate that. Or, you know, you got the odd comment, well, you know, you're not my cup of tea, mate, but good luck on you. And then you got the odd cup of tea, like, where have you been? What kind of, I've never heard this music before. That really is interesting. Because they were all interested in music. They were all interested in art, and those who were just interested in the booze, like you and Ria. And that was most of the band.
I mean, the thing that always sticks in your head about the music collective was, it didn't matter what sort of music you were playing. Granted, most of them were rock bands, but it didn't matter what sort of music you were playing. They would give you a stage to show yourselves, and then your own unique bits. And that was absolutely amazing to me. Usually, you couldn't do a set on a Monday night. What's the point? But yeah, the art centre was always, the music collective was always very unique and forward-thinking, I think.
As time moved along, the scene developed its own code and attitude. Vanity was not fondly accepted, whereas the showmanship was celebrated. Self-constructed pedestals would be quickly dismantled, and delusions of grandeur were derided.
But if they came in with that attitude, it was just like, you're home, you're with us now, you're one of us, you know? Whereas as soon as you got a band coming in who were kind of very much, what time we're going on? Can we get something to read from somewhere? And the guys who would like disappear until like 5 minutes before they went on stage, those were the guys that always bombed, because they didn't have that mindset that we all had, that I'd say if you had that mindset, you were accepted. People were accepted, but they had to kind of like prove themselves almost. As long as they had that mentality, and I think another thing is we were really lucky that in sort of like that period in the 90s, there was a hell of a lot of experimentation going on, and people were quite forgiving almost for, you know, musical tastes and it being varied. You know, you weren't taken out and crucified if you were a metal fan, but went, well, I actually really like the new Portishead album.
In the there's three different distinct bands I played with there. One was like each one was a metamorphosis from one to the next one. But each one of them we played with local bands mainly, and bands who were from like the Tyneside, Wearside and Teesside area. Although there was the odd one from Scotland or something came out of the area. But none of them had an attitude. All of them were just kind of like, well, yeah, let's see you, that's great. We're going on now. Obviously, within each band, no matter how nice you are, you always want to go down best, or go down and get a really good appreciation of what you're doing. And quite a lot of the times it didn't make a difference in there, because there was that many different styles and that many different, eclectic things going on. You just basically listened to a band, and nobody wanted to score points off anybody. Even though you might still want to be the one that shone out, you didn't try to score a point off another band by not giving them the credit that they deserved. You get band members standing there from other bands clapping, people who were the regulars there coming over and talking to you. It was just a really, really good atmosphere every time I've ever played there.
Not only was there a cap on self-importance, as Adam Laybourne explains, bands influenced one another. And the ideal behind the entire movement was of creation, which meant that not only was the audio assault an oral experience, but that originality was king.
12, 13, putting on the Hot and Heavy Express, you get, or whatever, I can't remember, Def Leppard, Iron Maiden, all the sort of stuff. Falls nicely in line, yeah, into all this, must get a guitar. I got one when I was 13, 14. Wasn't great at it. I was a bit crap. My dad played an acoustic guitar, but he wasn't much inclined about rock music, so wasn't an awful lot he could show me past like basic chords. But when I remember distinctly at the rock night, and I was sort of like on the fence with the whole guitar thing, it was Dadakop playing, and Peter McAdam clearly, for me, is like, I liked rock music, didn't know that much about the guitar. To me, he was just having fun making the sound. I mean, I'd watched enough music videos to know that he wasn't flying all over, but what he was doing was interesting. It wasn't Rage Against the Machine sort of noises and squealing, but that was certainly the feeling I got. Like, oh, I've never heard a guitar sound like that before. That's amazing. Well, I'll tell you what struck me, which I've never seen since, right? Original bands doing original music. It's so hard to find bands or it might be venues that are prepared to put them on to play their music. But now when I go out, all you hear is, well, I keep saying, well, last year you hear this one song being played by everyone. It's a really random song. Black Magic Woman. What the fuck? How many? You know, you can go to the same bar week in, week out and not see the band again for 6 months, but every week you'll hear Black Magic Woman. You're like, why? And all I want to hear is original music. And that's hard to find. But I don't think that can be underestimated. That, you know, the rock, the music collective, they encourage that. They encourage that sort of creativity from young'uns. Don't play us covers, play us your own vision. And the variety was there. You had all sorts. It was more valuable than I'm giving it credit for. It really was.
That influence began to have an impact on the regular crowds. They weren't only there because it was a place of acceptance, but they became followers of the band. Not only were they friends of the musicians, they were fans of the music.
To me, the fun is making your music, and I do put that down to that environment at the art centre, where everyone was making their own music. We all did the occasional cover, but it was... I mean, I'm sure Quel had a couple, which... the audiences were the same, the audiences get used to it, and even Quel had a couple of songs which people wanted to hear, and that's a thrill when you've been part of the band that came up with it. It's a real thrill. Okay, you might get a kick out of doing a cover, but come on, doing your own stuff.
There was one notable issue with the Washington scene. It was gender restricted. In terms of multicultural interaction, the scene itself was accepted. There was diversity when it came to race, but that was very small, and that was more of a reflection of the society in which the music collective operated. Washington was a little over 98% white at the time, which transferred over to the makeup of the audience, but apart from one or two exceptions, on stage it was male dominated. As Paul Lockney points out, the culture of the time was restrictive to female participation across all of rock music. There was no drive for balancing of the scales, and naively, it was one area where almost all of the bands made no inroads.
With everything else, things progressed and evolved naturally. And, you know, there wasn't that many bands with girls when we were young. is it Stonewatch? Am I thinking the right band? I auditioned for that band when I was like between bands before we formed Shock Treatment. And I was told later, because they've got the girl in, they've got the lass in, I'm afraid I don't remember her name. I was told by Cuz later that the only reason I didn't get the job was because I wasn't the girl. They loved me voice, but I wasn't the girl. And I think they were thinking, when it came to having girls in bands then, where we were, it was more about image than whether or not the girl could sing. But the image became a bit more important. And I think it's still to a degree now, I mean, we're living in more enlightened times now, but to a degree there's still that little element there that pretty girls can make it further. And I still think with Only Heart it's the wrong way to go. People should get what they deserve from their talent, not how they look. I've always been like that, because the Arts Centre was like I said, it was a progressive place and it was open-armed. And I think it's just possibly because there was so many lads there, it might have put some lasses off. That's always a possibility. I mean, Lisa Dominique from Marino the band, every picture of her in the crowd, she was all pouty-faced and crop top and tight pants, and that was the image that they put across for her. And she was a good singer, but they never really pushed that side of it.
The scene never really created a superstar, but it did lead to a number of members making a living out of music. From sound and roadie jobs to session musicians, from noted academics in music to event organisation, it did equip people with the ability to pay the bills from working within music, but not from the stage. Was there a reason why that step was never made?
It's two or three things. It's like we weren't fashionable, this area. We weren't in a good place for connections to get a little bit of a bump up. And I think in the case of a lot of bands I was in, personally speaking, this is me speaking personally, we just didn't have the drive or the push to do it. We kind of like did it and we're happy to be gigging once a week or twice a week, or putting out a self-promoted, self-financed album every now and again. And be lucky to get a bit of a play on the radio or whatever, and that was good enough for us. But I think again, the people I was involved with, we didn't have the drive or the push, but I think we didn't also have the roots out and the tools to do it, because we just weren't in a fashionable area.
Other scenes did develop talent in the same era. Some went on to huge successes. While this Washington scene was curated from the mid-80s, a mirror was happening in another Washington at the same time, with many of the same social influences and geographical restrictions hampering the chance to step forward. Washington State and places within, like Seattle and Aberdeen, gave the world their examples of that time and condition, with Soundgarden, Nirvana and others of their ilk. Washington Town and we was never going to bridge that gap. Even within the region there was no rival, and hardly any.
I think we played the Newcastle Arts Centre once, and if you think, art centres, we were going in going, hey, it's just going to be like Washington, everybody's going to be like, hey, well, hey. And it was just so standoffish, because I think there was a wider area to draw from in sort of like around Newcastle. They could be a lot more selective.
I think it was fairly unique in this area. I think somewhere that's kind of sort of not on exactly the same style, but is sort of emulating it a bit. It's like if you go up to the Black Bull at Gateshead, that's a kind of little venue, but that's a pub, but it's really nicely done. An art centre, it's a kind of different experience. There's a one up in Scotland as well, the Icebox, that's great up there, and that's really good. I would put that possibly on a par in a way with Washington, but not exactly the same, not for the same reasons, but on a par for friendly people, atmosphere, willingness to listen, great vibe. I hate that word vibe, but I've just used it. Great vibe, great, but what we did is had a great vibe. That's all I'm going to say, and that's exactly what Washington had.
I think I took it for granted, and actually outside of Washington, it was a struggle for an original band to get gigs. And that's what I see now in the year 2015. That all you see is cover bands, and unless you're gonna, you're gonna go and see an original band. But the places don't want to put them on, do they? Because then that's going to entertain the junkers on Saturday night.
The music collective ebbed and flowed across the years. In the 80s, a plan was hatched to bring folk rockers Fairport Convention to the venue, much to the annoyance of the other resident music organisation, the Davy Lamp Folk Club. They felt that they should have a monopoly on folk music, but the collective and Doug Walker trumped that. Instead of filling the venue, the Washington Music Collective name appeared on promotional posters for the band playing at the Sunderland Empire. It was proof that not only was it possible for them to organise big gigs in a little venue, but they could put on big gigs at a big one. The collective also looked at running at other venues, and at one point it appeared to outgrow its tenure at the Arts Centre. London-based promoters wanted a piece of the pie. They wanted their breaking acts to headline rock nights, but this idea was quashed, simply because there was no way that it would be allowed to halt the opportunity for local acts and self-starting local bands from further afield to take advantage of the setup. But it wouldn't last forever. Scott Hamilton last played the venue a decade ago, and it was a very different experience to those heady nights of 3 decades ago.
Till Quel died off mid-90s, I went away for a couple of years and came back, and we put together Bateman after that, and we kind of did the end of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s. So we kind of got to see the kind of like, I think a lot of it came down to the Arts Centre started being run more as part of like the council and the actual arts scene there, rather than it became very clean and very, this had to happen, this had to happen, this had to happen, this had to happen. I remember going back in early, probably about 2009, 2010, something like that, maybe even a little bit later, to play a gig there with Blackout Hotel, and we were organising the other bands, and we had to sign contracts to play, and it was like, what? What? We're getting 50 quid for, we've got to sign, because they had budgets and everything had to be accounted for, so it stopped being DIY and reactionary, and it became a business. I think that's what happened. It became not commercialized because you couldn't really sell what we were trying to do. It was just, it was an outlet for people, it was a night out. But when they started turning it into something that it wasn't, that's kind of when it started losing its audience and everything, because people were going, well, this doesn't feel quite right,
Even during the days considered as being the most successful, there was a fate, thanks to lax attitudes and mixed management. That was during a period without Doug being involved, but he was tempted back for a second stint as the overseer of the movement, but even that had to come to an end one day.
But we were becoming too popular for our own good, and I know there was like tentative things where we looked at having other nights at other venues, like the Casbah in Sunderland, the Ox Close community buildings. There was a few rock nights took place up there, but it wasn't the same because the venues weren't geared up the way the Arts Centre was. It was like that, but I got a phone call, could I come back down? Would I be interested in coming down to the collective meeting? Went down. It was there, and I was basically asked, would you consider coming back? And I said, well, cut long story short, I said yes. But rather than being an advisory thing, I said, I want to have talks here. And some of them were like, no, dead against that. And I said, I don't want the battles anymore, I don't need the battles. I know what needs to be done. I said, and I'm not stupid, I said, once the word gets out, Dougie's back. That'll start bringing people in, because they'll be expecting the whole collective days. But I went back and it was different. I wasn't expecting it to be the same, because it was like there was a lot of the younger audience coming through, but it was like people coming in, and I found I was certainly getting wrong for more things from the art centre, because it was a whole totally different setup. It was different staff there, different ways of having to do things, and this, that and the other. And they didn't, let's just say that they didn't like my way of running it, like off the cuff on the nights.
Those memories, posters, photographs and cassettes remain along with sentiment. There's no fanfare, there's no blue plaque. There's nothing that alludes to the collective or the work that was put towards the scene, and that's apt. A totemic token of recognition would not fit. That would give the impression that the Washington Music Collective was all about marking an achievement, which it wasn't. Hundreds of musicians trod the stage there, and almost all of them never received a penny in payment, because it was all about the love of the music.